Oh, hey, Christopher. How are you
Hello,
today?
Charlie. How are you? I'm good, thanks. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. Now, normally, my first question is, how do you like your coffee in the morning?
How
But
do I like my coffee in the morning? How are you having your coffee? Let's start with that.
well, exactly. So today, I've actually gone for a Nespresso machine with some chocolate milk. I know it was a bit rogue, but
Ooh,
do you know, we
I
just
like
thought
it.
let's mix it up a bit today.
I like it. I like how it's grown up Nespresso, but then at the same
Yeah,
time, chalky milk.
yeah, and we are
It's a
recording.
good combo. Well, I have gone.
We are recording it on a Friday afternoon, so we're starting to get to the end of play. We need to have a little bit of like the little fun time. So, what are you having?
Well, it's the end of play for you. It's the start of play for me. But I am having a. I have also got an espresso machine coffee, but I have just. I've gone for the quickest and cheapest option of just. I've banged a pod in the cup, splashed some water, not water, splashed some milk in there, and off we go. I'm trying to have like. Funnily enough, I was in a bit of a TikTok black hole with this the other day, looking at like
Go on.
Italian style coffee. You know, like you have like a cappuccino in the morning, and then you just have espresso in the afternoon as an energy boost. I'm trying to do that, but I've just had my morning coffee in air quotes at 1:30 in the afternoon. But when you do what I do for a living, this is the morning. So here we
Well,
are.
exactly, and we're going to get onto that today of what you do. And normally, I ask the guest or I ask the friends that come onto the podcast, but I'm going to flip it in reverse this time because we've known each other about 15 years now. It's too long. Um,
Yeah,
and the reason I'm going to give you
ages.
the intro, the reason I'm going to give you the intro is because I remember when easily we must have, and we will be in like the assembly hall doing something. I don't know, usually music related. And you were going to be. You always used to say, "I'm going to be a professional musician," and I think I heard you say it on multiple occasions. I think it got intersliced a little bit with "I'm going to be a rock star" quite a few times.
I
And
think it
as
might. I think
of
you're dolling me up in a professional way because it was definitely I'm going to be a rock star and then professional musician second. But nicely
yeah,
done.
well, yeah. Like I said, it's been 15 years, and yeah, our vernacular has improved since then. Um, but as of well, we're talking 6 to 12 months ago now. What can you officially say?
Blimey, I'm going to say it out loud. I am a professional musician, which is pretty crazy to say out loud. But yeah, you are right. I remember pretty much because we've known each other since high school onwards. Pretty much the entire time I've been saying to you and anyone will listen. Well, I think what I probably specifically said was I am going to be in Metallica, and I'm not in Metallica yet. I'm working on it, but definitely I'm going to be a musician. I'm going to be a rock star. Even your mum said that. Like your mum said, I'm going to do it,
Ah,
and which is crazy to
yeah,
say
yeah.
out loud. But yeah, yeah, that's what I do for a job now.
In fairness, my mum does have an incredible eye for people who say they're going to do something and whether they are actually going to do it or not. She's got a very good eye for that, and she said exactly the
Mm,
same. She did say
yeah,
from the start that you were going to do this. It was something that you were going to achieve. So I'm your biggest fan. I'm super proud. I love it when something materializes.
no,
The Metallica dream, a little bit of a stretch. I'll give you that, but I'm there's still a percentage of it could happen. I'm going to put it out there. It could still happen. We never know.
you never know exactly.
So on the musician side, obviously, I know you've been on a variety of bands. I know you've done a variety of different genres. But I believe something really cool just recently happened to you in the last month or so. Wasn't there a big a big radio show that was able playing your songs?
There was, yeah. So a couple of weeks ago, I sort of unveiled to the world a band that I've been working in. Well, a member of called Darla, which is through two of my pals that I did a lot of touring with, and then we decided, oh, well, we're all friends and we all work in the music industry. Why don't we just do our own band? instead of just constantly working for other people, which we all still do. One of the band members is a full-time band manager. Another one is a tour manager and a merch manager for lots of touring agencies and touring artists. And I play bass for a living. But yeah, so it's called Darla, and then we brought out our first single, which is called Sequel, a couple of weeks ago. And literally 3 days after it came out, it got picked up and played on the Radio 1 introducing show, which was obviously amazing.
Obviously,
big career, big career milestone. Big career milestone for me.
Well, some of the
really
biggest artists have come from BBC introducing. You know, you don't have to list the variety of like Lord and oh my god, some names escape from me, but that's usually how they start. You know, they get picked up. I think it was Adele as well. It got picked up from introducing, kind of got the first show, and it's usually that first rung to getting that bigger exposure. So, question that people will be interested to know is, you know, a lot of businesses will look for partners to start a business, and obviously in your context, you've found friends, you found partners to start a group. How do you even go about starting whether they are the right people?
Tricky one. I think what I've learned in my limited time on this earth is there's a lot of musicians and a lot of musical groups that will come together on the musical ability of the people. So, for example, I was in a band relatively recently, about 2 years ago, where I was essentially brought in because I was good at playing my instruments. The drummer was amazing, singer was amazing, guitarist was amazing. The actual individual proficiency of those cogs of that wheel were all very good. However, because being a musician is such a team sport, as I like to describe it, and even more so being in a band, when cracks form, if you're not good at handling those cracks or dealing with friction of conversations or business problems or just disagreements, it makes it a really difficult scenario to work with. So in this particular example that I'm mentioning, a lot of the members weren't very nice people. So as a result, when the going got tough, it all fell apart fairly quickly, because whilst the proficiency of each member as an individual was great, from a team perspective, it was a terrible match. So what I try my best to do is, obviously beggars can't be choosers. Sometimes you've just got to work with people you might not necessarily want to be best friends with. But I do my very best to, when I'm working with people, do my best to pick people that I get along with, because I have to spend a lot of time with individual people when I'm working with them in a musical perspective. You know, if you're playing a gig, for example, that's going to be, you know, might be 2 or 3 hours in the car. Then you've got the hour and a bit of setting up. You've then got maybe, let's say, 2 hours of downtime while you're getting something to eat, or you're just waiting in the venue. Sometimes you're just sat in a car park for 2 hours because there's no green room. Then you've got to play, and then you've got to do it all again in reverse. So realistically, you could be spending somewhere between 10 and 14 hours with someone that you've met for the first time that day. So people skills are very important. So when it came to Darla, my latest band, I actually picked people that I was friends with first. Obviously, there's no question on the musical ability and the expertise of the people in the band. But we all went and we all set out to say, why don't we be a band where we're all mates, and then we'll turn it into a band, as opposed to forcing friendship into a professional relationship?
I think you make so many good points there. One, you know, you've really broken down how many hours you spend with these people. You know, the statistics always go, when you're in your working day, you've got to be really careful on which business you work for, which company culture you work for, and in this instance, again, as a band, because if you're spending, you know, for you're spending up to 14 hours a day. You know, most will spend 8 to 10 hours a day with these people. That's more than your partner. That's more than your best friends. That's more than your family. You know, so it's having sort of that intention to go, I know I need to, if I'm going to have these people in my environment, we're gonna make some really good quality music, and we're gonna have fun with this. You've got to be friends in that first instance, and you've already got results, from it. But just going back to, the old band where through stress testing, through the increase of pressure, it eventually fell apart. When it was falling apart, what was, how were you feeling at the time? And, what was that experience like for you?
It was a tricky one because that band in particular was essentially falling to pieces because of how would I word this? Basically, some sort of there was elements of very toxic behavior in that group. So there was this is probably not a typical scenario with every working example, but when the stress was introduced of deadlines or various just various difficulties you may face in a business or a band, which to be fair as well, running a band is exactly the same as running a business. You've got elements of you've got financial aspects, marketing aspects, the actual product, marketing the product, getting the product out, etc., etc. There's so much overlap, and when those hurdles that inevitably pop up started to appear, you would see cracks in various people's sort of attitudes and the way they would deal with stress. There were members in that particular group that would go very aggressive very quickly in terms of sometimes when you're doing something at work, something's not going well, and some people respond by they may go internal and deal with the stress internally, then calm down, present a plan or an idea, like a solution, whereas other people project those negative emotions out as loud as they possibly can, and that's what those people were doing. And it wasn't a great environment, because ultimately one of the reasons why I actually don't think that band is even a band anymore, I think they've stopped functioning as a working band, is there was a lot of double standards and lies and stuff like that, and not to spill the tea too hard, but basically the main thing was it just wasn't very well ran from the way it was put together, from a stress management or a hierarchy of power. The main thing was imagine it was supposed to be like a 25% equal sharing between all the members of responsibilities, finances, etc. And then as time went on, you started to learn that actually there were a few other people with much bigger slices of the pie, and they were deliberately misleading other people from that information, which led to sort of a mass walkout of several members, including me. And then following that, an aggressive turnover of other members. But I think the main thing, to swing it back to your question, is when you hit those stressful environments or those stressful issues you face as a business or as a musician, when you've got a good team around you, they don't feel that bad, because it's almost like a kind of, it's all right, we'll get through it together. We'll solve the problem together. There's no emotion. We're all on the same team, moving in the same direction. So it doesn't feel like an argument. It's like oh no, this has happened, not to worry, we'll sort it. Whereas the opposite of that environment, when it's not a good, well-run environment, is you start to get people picking at other people. It turns into well, here's my idea to fix it. Here's your idea to fix it. And now we are just going to have a debate that isn't really a debate. It's just who can argue their point the best. Not whether their idea is the best idea, just who can shout the loudest, essentially. And as I'm sure you probably think the same, Charlie, or anyone else who's listening, that's such a bad idea. It's really not going to work.
Yeah, I all the points you're making are for me absolutely bang on. Also from experience, and I've got a little bit of a chip on my shoulder about people trying to win by who can shout the loudest. I'm almost allergic to it, because it doesn't, as you very concisely put out, it doesn't actually promote a good culture in problem solving, because things are going to break, things are going to happen, things are not going to go to plan A, but that's why there's 25 letters in the alphabet, because you have plan B, C, D, E, carry on with the rest. Apparently I don't know the alphabet. and and you need to have that team where if something happens, you go into that problem solving mode, be able to communicate that on the same level. And I find it really, really interesting that you've really delved a lot more into the the people communications. And I think that is because you've had so much exposure to having to work with so many different types of people, and how you've been able to manage and handle that. So with with the new band, and you've had some good initial success, and you now your whole income is coming from music, which was definitely the original vision. If you had endless resources, what would be the big goal going forward? What's that big vision now?
I think ultimately what I'm doing right now as a business, which essentially for those who aren't aware is I just play musical instruments for people. That is essentially my job in one sentence. So particularly it's bass, it's also guitar, stuff like that. But I mean, ultimately for me, what I would like to do is continue doing pretty much exactly what I'm doing, but the level of the client increases. So at the moment, I'm playing for smaller independent artists, my own band, various different corporate function and wedding bands. But again, it's all playing for someone else. You need me to play this for you for XYZ. I would like to continue doing that. That's still the goal. But what I am doing is of a higher level. So I guess the two easiest ways to explain this is bigger artists and bigger venues, I guess, which ultimately you would like to think would lead to larger income as well. But I'm putting income as income for me, not necessarily just business revenue as an actual, profits or money back into my pocket as the director of the company. But mainly for me, it's those first two before we get to the money part. Obviously, money makes the world go round at the end of the day, but it's not the thing that makes me happy. Finances for me has always been a thing where it's just need it because you need it. I'm not a big flashy spender or anything like that. So the goal for my business, which is essentially just me at the end of the day, is improve the business, grow the business, increase the level of clientele I work with, and sure, money will follow. That's great, but that's not the main goal at the moment.
I mean, and that is from my opinion, is the right way to be going about business. If you go into business, and you as yourself go in for the wrong reasons, you'll get to 3, 5, 10 years down the line, and at some point you will have sort of an existential crisis because you're like, why? How have I ended up here? Whereas because you're not going in for because of the money, but you're going in for the love. As already, minimum 15 years in, probably 20 years in, probably your whole life. You probably the rest of your life. I know you would be so happy just living and breathing music. Now, one of the things I thought was really interesting is, if you say you're one of my clients, what I would be advising you at this point is to be looking at your own personal brand. Fortunately, I've had quite a few conversations this week with my clients about this, but I already think you're already one step ahead. Because one of the really great ways to increase your personal branding is to start a podcast. This is one of the roads I'm going on for myself, but you're already way ahead. So now, do you want to tell the audience a little bit more about your podcast?
Absolutely. So, as well as being a session musician and all other musical shenanigans, I am also a podcast host, indeed. So I co-host my own podcast with a friend of mine called Johnny Dibble. It's called In the Pocket, and essentially it's a podcast for bass players. Now, don't turn off immediately because I understand that is quite a niche topic at the end of the day, but it's quite popular to double down into a niche at the end of the day, and that's what we've decided to do. But yeah, we cover things like recent events and news, for example, new products that have appeared in that field, for example. But we also try our best to give it it's a very light-hearted podcast. Everything's kind of I mean, there's a lot of complaining because we talk about our own professional lives as well, and I think any good podcast needs to have positives and negatives in there.
Yeah.
But we have viewers submitted questions covering everything from what's your opinion on X product? Do you think they're the best product like they claim to be, or is there something else you've seen that's better? These kind of things, like our insight on someone who's handled a lot of bass equipment, for example. But then also there'll be big, deep topics that we'll try our best to dive into. So in a recent episode, we covered imposter syndrome and how that affects us, how we're attempting to deal with it. So obviously for myself, being a self-employed musician, imposter syndrome and those kind of topics pop up quite a lot, because at the end of the day, the only person who's motivating me to do a good job is me. So am I doing a good enough job? Am I being efficient enough? But at the same time, are you stopping to take a break? Because if you don't stop to take a break, you're going to lose a week in a few weeks because you'll burn out, and you need to catch those behaviours when you see them. Johnny, for example, the co-host, runs a really successful YouTube channel. He's just hit 15,000 subscribers on YouTube. He kind of covers things like product demos, reviews of various products and equipment in the bass field, but he's also in the kind of like, I would say he's dipping his toe in the kind of influencer kind of world, but again, in the niche of bass guitar. And he has the same discussions as well. Is my channel growing quick enough? Oh God, I was looking at the analytics for this last video and it's not performing anywhere near as well as the one before it, but I thought it was going to. All these kind of things. And we cover those topics as well. But yeah, it's a great podcast. I also edit the podcast as well, which is really fun. Being a musician, I'm really into things like audio editing as well, so I do that. And yeah, it's really good fun. I get to chat to one of my mates for about 2 hours every 2 weeks, and we put it up. People seem to like it, so there we go.
Now, it's really funny that you mention imposter syndrome. Let's focus on that, because definitely in our friendship group in high school, you are and still are, one of the most outwardly confident people. Your presence is always known, and especially when you get onto stage, you have what appears to the audience zero fear to get out within the audience, to have fun with the audience, to really be the showman, to be the entertainer, and to go from that, you're on the stage. You're not the bass player isn't the lead. Usually, is the singer is usually a bit more the face person, even though your presence as a bass player is definitely known on that stage. How does it feel, kind of sidestepping with that imposter syndrome, for being able to almost hide behind the lights to be that showman in the playing your bass and hiding behind your bass, to then becoming on a podcast, to being like, there's nowhere really to hide. Yes, you could probably hide behind the mic a little bit, but you really are exposing yourself a lot more.
I didn't catch the very end of the question there, Charlie, but the part I heard about the imposter syndrome and the hiding behind the instrument and stuff, it's interesting, because it doesn't bother me as much as I thought it was going to, because aside from music, before I went full-time as a musician, I had a fairly extensive background working in sales, so I didn't really have a choice when you work in that field. You have to get out there, and you have to engage in conversation with people, almost a little bit like a podcast, I would say, similar to the format we were having right now, but as a sales call. So that felt fairly natural to me. At the same time, I'm quite vocal and happy to speak about the negative side of things very comfortably, in terms of things like imposter syndrome, or not feeling like you're good enough, or your internal process. I think that's kind of down to, in my early 20s, I kind of fell into a lot of like mental health issues. I had a really bad stint of depression and anxiety. Like, it's really, really quite bad. But now, coming out of the other end of that, I'm aware that you need to speak about things. You can't hide things away. You need to verbalize your issues, otherwise you're never going to fix them. So again, I'm comfortable speaking about topics like imposter syndrome, for example, because I know it needs to be done. And we've had the feedback from the podcast where we've spoken about these topics, where listeners of the podcast have reached out to us privately and said, I'm really glad you said that, because I feel the same way about this, which will be almost exactly the same problem. But now I know I'm not the only one, or I'm seeing someone who hosts a podcast that I enjoy. It doesn't feel as bad anymore. Like, I know it's manageable because there are other people out there managing it. And as for the sort of performer part, again, that's not bothered me that much either, because I know there's a bit of a stereotype for, like, the bass player sits at the back and doesn't really do anything, but I've come in gun swinging with when doing it for my job, where I just ignore that and I still act like the way I did. Like Charlie will know I still perform on stage like I'm 14, because it's the same. To me, I feel like I'm 14 again when I get up on stage, because I'm essentially playing for a living. It's like playing with Lego, but on stage, it's the same thing for me. So there's no sort of, oh, I'm hiding behind things. I've never been a singer, so I don't have to deal with the problem of kind of like, oh, it's just me stood there with everyone looking at me. I've always been playing an instrument, so there is, to an extent, definitely an element of being able to hide behind the instrument. But again, I've never had that. I've always kind of just got stuck in from like the second I started playing an instrument when I was about 13 or 14. It was like, I'm going to get on stage. I'm going to play guitar behind my head. I'm going to get in the crowd and wind up someone's mum on stage at the middle of a school concert, which, Charlie, you will probably remember that quite well. But yeah, it's never really been an issue for me because I've never not done it. It's like I came out the gate swinging. So my only objective really is just keep swinging. I don't have to go, oh, you were a lot more reserved, but now you need to lift it up. I was already at a level of performance. If anything, sometimes I have to rein it in a little bit, which I'm better at doing now from a professional perspective, because it's not always required to try and take attention off the singer, for example. So when I play with an artist called Kim Jennett, a singer called Tom Byron. I play for a lot of wedding acts that will have like sort of a solo artist. I've also played in the backing bands for lots of tribute acts where, yes, they want a performance, they want something to feed off on stage, but you need to still let them have the forefront of the attention. I would describe it as best supporting actor. That's what you're aiming for. You don't want to be Leonardo DiCaprio. You want to be Tom Hardy, always. I can't hear you, Charlie. You've disappeared on me. Oh, hello? Talk to me.
There we go. Is that better?
Oh, yeah, you're back.
Okay, there we go.
The picture quality went down to like a potato, and then all the
Yeah,
audio went.
Yeah, I'll snip it out.
Oh,
Been so good.
I know, so far so good. 1 second. I'm just right. Sorry about that. We'll it seems to be fine. If we need to do a backup or whatever, we've done it in the past where I've me and Johnny have had this problem over like Skype, where what we've done is we've like rang each other, spoke with one headphone in so we can hear each other, and then just cracked on and sync the audio later. If you need to do that, we can always do that.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of technology. So what I've done, I've marked where this has stopped, and I'll mark it again when we start again, and I'll just slice all of this out. Just have to do it on an evening and time.
Yeah.
Now I've lost my flow.
I was talking about sort of coming out the gate swinging anyway, and then the bit they ended on was sort of like best supporting actor, and not overshadowing the people that you're playing for, that kind of thing.
Especially we even got one more question really as well. I mean, we could do several podcasts. Tell you
now. Yeah, I can talk about anything for any period of time you like.
Okay, I'll finish that sentence that I was on that you didn't hear, and then I'll go into the final question. I'll just have to wrap it up.
Sure, sounds good.
So basically, just stealing the show at the Oscars then, Best Supporting Act. So on that, I love that in today's podcast, we really have delved into the parallels of start getting into the music business, getting into that music world, and almost, how to grow and work within an organization. I think what you've spoken about today is really kind of undervalued sometimes, where who you work with does make a massive difference to if the business survives or not. I think one sort of final question, what was it? A lot of people have a business idea. They say they're going to do something, but they never make that leap. They never make that step. What was it for you where you eventually just went, right, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do it now?
Oh, very interesting, because essentially it wasn't up to me, is how I describe it to people. So, as I touched on earlier, I worked in sales pretty much straight out of university up until just over 12 months ago, through various. I did a brief stint in recruitment, a couple of different tech sales companies covering different things like STEM, ed tech, etc., etc. But essentially, I always wanted to do music, but I feel like I was never going to take the leap because I was too worried about things like consistency, income, job security, etc., etc. But then out of the blue, myself and 7 other guys at the company I work for was made redundant. Purely as a locational decision. Most of the company was based down in London, but me and about 7 other guys ran a Manchester office. And basically, just out of the blue, they just told us they don't want a Manchester office anymore. So 5 days later, I was made redundant. So I thought, well, why not? May as well give it a go. So I kind of feel like it was the universe or some sort of mystical higher power that said to me, you've not given this a go yet. I would have been 27 at the time. Yeah, I would have been 27 at the time. It's like, you're 27. Are you really going to give it a go at 37? Because you're definitely not going to give it a go at 47. And then it'd be way too late at 57. So I thought, no, you know what? I'm gonna give it a shot, because I can try, I can do my best for several years, and if I fail miserably, I can go back to something else in my late 30s or 40s or even 50s and just take it from there. So every day since then is basically let's just give it a go, and here we are, basically.
No, I love it because that really, resonates with me from my experiences. You've probably, more than most have seen me, try at different businesses and different ventures, and just going out there, and sometimes they haven't worked out, and you're like, and things haven't gone to plan, but then they actually, what then happens in the following months has always been bigger and better. And I do sometimes, I truly believe that it is the universe course correcting what the path that you were meant to go on. And as spiritual, or there's no evidence to to back up my thinking on this, but it's pure, just that gut feeling that sometimes when something has really rubbish has happened, like being made redundant and only getting 5 days, that's that's awful. But what you've then got out of it is then you're living and breathing your passion. And I do think it is the universe doing that course correction. So with all the listeners,
I think you're right. I think you're definitely right there.
So for the listeners, what is one thing that they can buy from you that's under £100 where they would get a ton of value?
That is a really good question, because essentially, you can't. Not that I'm overpriced or anything, but the main thing, what a textbook example would be, something like lessons or consultancy or musical director work, which would kind of sit you. A music teacher these days would want somewhere around maybe £30 an hour for a lesson, which would be amazing value if you play an instrument. The insight you can get from someone who is they've just been doing it longer than you. If that's the only factor, you can learn so much. Like I pay for lessons every now and again, not consistently, but I will will reach out to like someone who's quite an established session musician, or just someone I know who's a teacher who may have a certain technique that I just don't know how to do. I'll reach out and I'll book a lesson with them, and it'd be like, I really like how you do that. Can you show me how to do it? And they will. So that's a great thing. If that was something I offered, that would be my suggestion. The only reason I don't offer that is I'm currently putting basically 100% of my effort at the moment into growing my profile as a session musician. Once I get that to a level I'm happy with, or it's growing at a consistent rate that it doesn't require me to be constantly banging away and trying to grow as aggressively as I can, I would offer something like that. But finally, as a point on costing, I was going to mention briefly that to hire a musician, you're supposed to really pay. Well, the Musicians' Union dictates it's about £150. That's your call-out rate as a musician. And you'd be surprised how many people don't want to pay that. So if you'd up your threshold, Charlie, to £150, I would say you can get me to do whatever you want for 3 hours, essentially. But alas, for £100, unless we're pals, there's not much I can offer you at the moment, unfortunately.
No, that's fine. Because we are pals, I would actually pay you double, because that's what I think friends should be doing for small businesses if they're helping each other. And you can hold me to that promise as well. You can hold me to that promise. But I know you
I
are
am screen
touring.
recording as we speak.
You are touring. You like you said, you're at plenty of different sessions and gigs. So I think what I could very happily say to the audience, if you spot Chris's face on a poster or a social media post or any gig that's passing you by, go and book, because you will be entertained. It will be good. The quality is awesome every time. I've thoroughly enjoyed watching you every single time. I can say that, and that's why I was really super keen for you to come on today. You've been a pleasure, as always. I always love having a catch up and chat with you. And I hope we obviously come on for another episode, and we'll speak soon.
Gladly, anytime.